Well, welcome everyone. The name of this workshop is The Traditions. My name is Lisa N. from Wisconsin, and I am a compulsive overeater. Welcome to the first ever Dallas Virtual Convention. This session's format is one speaker for 45 minutes, then the floor will be open for 2 minutes, Q&A and shares. Before I introduce the speaker, here is some housekeeping information. Attendees are set to mute. We ask you to rename yourself to your first name and last initial. If you wish, you can add your phone number or email. This session is being recorded. Only the audio portion will be made available. Please stop your video if you are walking around, driving, or eating. You will still be able to hear the session. We may turn off your video for you. Please send a chat message when you are ready to have your video turned back on. If you want to change your view settings, click on the View button on the top right of your screen. You may choose either Gallery or Speaker View. Also, please note that chat is set to host only. Questions and comments will only be seen by the host. And our speaker today is Dodie H. Welcome, Dodie, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you very much. What a delight it is to be here, and I've heard some wonderful speakers so far today. I hope I don't break the record, but I'll give it a good shot. It is pretty standard, I think, for most of us to qualify a little bit before we take off on our talk. And I have been in OA. With the grace of God, I will have 38 years of continued abstinence on June 23rd. And I just tell myself, if I just do today what I did yesterday, I'll make it to June 23rd and 38 years. So I'm very blessed. I'm maintaining a 90-pound weight loss for all these years, which in itself is a miracle. I am what they call, well, I call myself a 3-0-0-1er. And that is, I have 3 meals a day, nothing in between, with 0 binge foods. I mean, no personal binge foods, 1 day at a time. And that has pretty much been my meal plan through my entire OA experience. I have a sponsor and I have sponsees. So that's, probably enough about me. I will be using some notes because this is a very complex topic, and I think the only thing I could speak about for 45 minutes spontaneously are my 15 grandkids. So since that isn't the topic that I was given, I will be referring to some notes. And when I was given the topic of traditions, it really made me go back to the basics of this program. And so I looked up, what is a tradition? The dictionary definition is, a tradition is a long established or inherited way of thinking or acting, okay? Long established. And of course, our traditions come from the traditions of AA, adapted for the use of Overeaters Anonymous. So they have been around for quite some time. And as many of you have probably read in some of our literature and the AA literature, they were pretty hard to come by. They had to go through some pretty hard knocks before they became established traditions. And so I got to thinking about traditions, and I haven't done a traditions workshop for quite some time. But when I did, the real fun of it was having audience participation. We would talk about a tradition, and then we'd say, okay, what's your experience with this tradition? And unfortunately, right now, or the way we're doing these meetings, we don't have that one-on-one interaction of people responding to my questions, which, so this is just a little bit different way of doing what I would normally do to learn about the traditions. But I got to thinking of how many traditions we have in our lives. I mean, they start from when we were little. I mean, one of the first traditions I can remember is sitting at the children's table at the family Christmas. You know, the adults sat at the big table and the kids sat at the little table. And I think one of our aspirations was always to live long enough to make it to the adult table, you know. And I mean, that was a long established tradition. And I thought about a couple of other traditions, not necessarily mine, but some you might be familiar with. And one would be that Dad always sits at the head of the table, you know, and I see some people shaking their head. Yes, that's just the way it's always been. Another one might be all shoes are left at the front door. And I've been in that situation a number of times. That is not my tradition. So when I went into a house and just walked in, I mean, it was kind of like everybody was aghast because I still had my shoes on. And it wasn't until I saw, you know, a dozen shoes lined up against the wall that it occurred to me that that was the tradition in that home. So sometimes traditions are broken unintentionally, as was the case when I walked in. Sometimes they could be broken intentionally, where someone is tired of a tradition for whatever reason, and they break it intentionally to try and kind of stir the pot, so to speak, to maybe get some other thoughts going on a topic. Excuse me. However, when a tradition is broken and it comes to our attention, often there's some embarrassment or, you know, a little discomfort or anxiety when a tradition is broken. And we are going to talk about that as this hour goes on. So I think a couple of points I want to make. And one is that I think it's very important that we use the traditions in our meetings regularly, discuss them frequently, because newcomers need to know our traditions, because we want to save them from that embarrassment, that awkwardness, that discomfort of breaking a tradition. And I use the term breaking, and I've gone back and forth about this. I really feel that you don't break traditions. You may not honor a tradition, but I will probably be using the term break, even though I really don't think that's quite the, you know, I don't want to say you dishonor a tradition, but sometimes we do not honor a tradition. So let's think about the importance of newcomers and their need to know our traditions. Okay. Again, particularly for our newcomers, but also for all of us, I personally feel that we need to read the full traditions at every meeting. And different meetings that I go to, some read the tradition of the month, and that's it. I have heard people say, I don't need to be to the meeting on time because all they're going to do is read the steps and traditions. And I've heard it a million times. I can get in my 12 o'clock meeting. If I go in at 12:15, I get the good stuff, you know? And so I think we have to be very, very careful about honoring the traditions by reading them in full at every meeting. Obviously, that's a group conscience decision. We'll be talking about that. But, you know, this is my 45 minutes, so you all have to listen to my opinions. Anyway, I'm going to go to page 89 of our 12 and 12. It's just a wonderful page. And honestly, I don't think I've read it for a while because it's the page before tradition 1. So if you didn't know it was there, you might miss all this wonderful stuff. So I'm going to read it by paragraph. Introduction to the 12 traditions. When we first came to Overeaters Anonymous, we were focused on our own recovery. Most of us took the OA groups we attended and the OA fellowship as a whole for granted, not thinking much about how they operated and whether they would continue to be there for us in the future. Soon, however, we were left behind on our dependence on food. Soon, however, as we left behind our dependence on food, we began to rely on OA. We felt it was our only safe haven, and we reached with fear anytime we thought this fellowship might be threatened. And frankly, when I came into OA, I didn't look at it as a lifelong journey. I thought of it as a path to perhaps once again lose some weight. I didn't understand the concept of the 12 steps. I didn't understand that this lifelong journey was going to start, be 38 years. I had no concept. I came to OA to lose weight yet again. Yet we quickly found that we did not need to be afraid for the health of OA. Overeaters Anonymous has 12 traditions that are designed to keep our meetings and service bodies on track, functioning in such a way as to nourish the recovery of all compulsive overeaters who seek help in this fellowship. This study of the tradition shows us how these 12 suggestions have worked to help individuals, groups, and OA as a whole solve problems, thrive, and be effective instruments for carrying the message of recovery to those who still suffer. And over time, I was absolutely amazed that OA could continue to function in such a seemingly unstructured, casual way. My work experience was very different than this sort of casual group of suggestions. I come from an academic background. I was faculty at the college level for many years, and it was very structured. There was a hierarchy, there were committees, you went to this and to that and the other thing. So to be really entrusting my life to this organization that was so unstructured was very scary to me, because, I thought, well, I can get this fixed. If I stay long enough, I can fix it. I can get them organized. So anyway, but I remember that very arrogant attitude when I first came into OA. And then the final paragraph. We owe a large debt of gratitude to Alcoholics Anonymous for breaking ground in establishing these traditions and allowing OA to adapt them to our fellowship. Developed through long and sometimes painful experience, the 12 traditions embody spiritual principles for living. Those who have studied them carefully have found that these traditions can be applied effectively to all human relationships, both inside and outside OA. With this in mind, we turn our attention to the traditions, trusting that as we come to understand them better, we will be better able to keep OA strong and healthy and ourselves spiritually fit in the face of all challenges. And I like that, in the face of all challenges. It doesn't just say in our battle against the bulge, or whatever, our food issues. And keep ourselves strong and healthy and spiritually fit in the face of all challenges. And as I said, at this point, I would probably be asking my audience to share some of the ways that they have used traditions outside of the program, because I think it kind of goes lockstep. Here's how we use it in program, and here's how we can use the spiritual principle in our lives. And I'll hit on a few of those, but I'm not personally going to try and go, tit for tat. But were we face to face, I know out there are wonderful examples of how we have used these traditions in our personal lives. And before I totally leave the 12 and 12, the chapters in the 12 and 12 are really, really good. They're concise, it just says it like it is. And each tradition has a wonderful set of questions. And, as I was reading this and looking at it, I thought, what a good idea it would be if every one of our meetings maybe did a tradition of the month. In January, we do tradition 1, and maybe take an extra 10 or 15 minutes after our monthly business meeting to go over these questions and to really see, are we following the traditions? Both we can answer them personally and we can answer them for our group. And they're very insightful. They wouldn't take long, but I want to offer that suggestion to you, that you consider taking that idea to the group conscience in your individual meetings, and that you use those questions as sort of a sounding board. Are we following the traditions, or does our group need to make some changes? So with that in mind, let me see, where am I? I'm looking at my notes. So let's go. I'm going to sort of go through the traditions and give you some personal experience with the traditions. One thing that I did want to say is, in my almost 38 years in OA, I have been blessed with the opportunity to see the traditions in action at many different service levels. Obviously, I started out as an individual OA member in an intergroup. And, there I learned some specific traditions, at first. I think, one of them, that's where I learned tradition 7, that we are self-supporting, that although we have no dues, it is the expectation that a member will give as they can to help support our organization. So that's the first time I'd ever seen that tradition. And then I went on to become an intergroup rep. And that's probably when I began to start seeing the need for tradition 9, where I saw we needed a little bit more organization. At the group level, maybe you have a secretary, maybe you have a treasurer, maybe they're the same person, who knows? But it's not very organized. But suddenly you're at the group level and you begin to see the need for some organization. And so then, tradition 9 sort of became obvious to me. And then I was blessed to go on for service at the region level. And there I really began to see the 5th tradition about each group has but one primary purpose, and that is to spread the OA message. Excuse me. And for my personal experience, this is where I really began to see this primary purpose, that the region level is really focused on spreading the word. Okay, then I went on, and again, I was fortunate enough to be a trustee, and for 10 years, as a matter of fact, I was a trustee. Many traditions became very obvious to me, but one in particular was tradition 6, where we don't let the OA name be entered, into any public controversies or whatever. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But you can see, and then again, when I was so blessed to go on and become the chairman of the board, and that's when all of the traditions, but particularly that God is our ultimate authority. I was, really a worker for my higher power. That although, I was chairman of the board, I didn't have any more authority, than what the group would have, and that I was subject to the will of my higher power. So, I've just been blessed with these multiple opportunities to see how these traditions work and how it holds OA together. those are our suggestions. We have 12 suggestions that keep us going as a whole. In tradition 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on OA unity, and the spiritual principle is unity. And this is where we really have to let go of our personal wants. Okay, I want to lose weight. Okay, that's eventually softens as we do lose the weight, but it becomes obvious that what this program offers is more than weight loss. It's a way of life. It's a way of life. And this first tradition helps us to realize that we have to look at the group as a whole. We have to do what's good, not only for our individual group, but for the larger group. And this is where I've heard people say that they have taken this particular tradition into their work situation and that they need to focus on the unity of the group. And as long as they do that and they don't let petty outside issues and differences interfere, that they get along just fine. And here, there's many places I could put this, but what if someone does not honor a tradition? For whatever reason, they're perhaps putting their own needs before others. And, this, I hadn't thought of this until just this moment. I was trying to think of some examples. But once guidelines are established, it's the responsibility of all members to follow them. And so this might be an example. Your group decides that you choose not to have any specific foods mentioned in a share. You could perhaps, mention food groups, but no specific foods. And then someone decides, I really need to talk about my ice cream binges. And so they do that in spite of the fact that it has been the group conscience that they will not mention specific foods. So what do? Let's say that is the situation. Do you say something now, later, or let it go and just say, oh, that's Susie, you know Susie. And not only when should you do it, but who should do it? And ideally, your leader is responsible for the honoring of the traditions. However, not all leaders will accept that responsibility. They're unaware of it, or they may not even realize that a tradition has been broken. So again, this is the way I do it, and it has worked well over the years. It's never comfortable to have to call attention if a tradition is not being honored. The many times that I've done it over the years, my heart is pounding, my hands are sweating, I'm a wreck. And I have to weigh my personal comfort against, the need to say something. So this is my two things. If it's something that perhaps someone was truly unaware of, like I didn't know that, we didn't speak about food, individual items of food, I would probably let it go. And then after the meeting, I would, take the person aside who said something, and I would, mention to them that the group prefers, it was the group conscience, it was the group decision that we not mention individual foods. Okay, just, and then of course they're going to be mortified and, say, no. I realize, you didn't know this or whatever. However, if it's during a meeting, and let's say somebody brings out brings in an outside piece of literature. I'll just say the Bible for lack of using any other title. And they're going to read a passage from the Bible. If I was a leader, I would feel the need to stop that right then and there, because we do not do outside literature. So what I have developed is I would probably say something like, I'm uncomfortable with having literature read that does not have the OA approval. So I try and make it an I message rather than, you can't read from that Bible. That's not allowed in this meeting. I mean, as the second way is probably what I would have done 37 years ago, but all these years have mellowed me a little bit, and I would try and be more gentle. And it brings to mind a meeting that I attended years ago. I entered OA in San Francisco when I was there getting some advanced education. And excuse me. And I was at a meeting, and it was a meeting I wasn't really familiar with. I don't know how come I ended up there, but anyway, and a newcomer came in a little late. So they didn't hear the beginning things because they had trouble finding the meeting. Okay, so she goes to share and she's talking, and she shared that she simply could not stop eating French fries. And the meeting leader did exactly what I did before. He said, you can't say French fries in this meeting. We don't talk about specific food products. Well, she was mortified. She stopped her share and just dropped her head. And we never saw her again. We never saw her again. And 37 years later, I still remember and share the pain of that member. So I just offer those, couple of different ways, either at the time with an I'm uncomfortable about this, or, whatever, or either, and, sometimes somebody has left. You can always call them, or talk to them the next time you see them. But anyway, so that's tradition 1, our common welfare. Tradition 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. And the spiritual principle is trust. And this is sort of the flip side of tradition 1. In tradition 1, we talk about OA unity, and then in tradition 2, we talk about the group conscience. And that's how we establish and keep unity of purpose. Again, as I've mentioned before, I was flabbergasted at the loosey-goosey way an OA meeting was run. I didn't understand how that would work. This week's leader probably wasn't going to be next week's leader. How would anything ever get done? But to my amazement, it does get done. It does get done. And we trust that a loving God, as expressed in our group conscience, will help us make the best decisions for the group. And sometimes it's hard to let go if you have a differing opinion. And that's why trust, as that spiritual principle, is so important. We have to trust that the group conscience will really reflect God's will for us. And a story, certain things just stick out in your mind. And I was teaching at a university, and we had a semester system. So every semester I had a different schedule. So I had my regular meetings and everything was going along fine, until lo and behold, I had to teach a class right in the middle of my favorite meeting. Oh, well, that was a nuisance. So I looked around. Which one? Oh, there's one, 4:30. I can do it right on my way home. Perfect. I'll do that one instead of this other one. So I went to the meeting, and when they started to share, and it was a good sized group, 7 or 8 people, all they were talking about was the incest that each member had experienced. And honestly, I thought, have I come to the wrong meeting? Is this an OA meeting? And so anyway, I thought, well, maybe it was just, coincidental. So I went the next week, and the same thing happened. That's all they talked about. It had nothing to do with, the steps and how they use them to combat the disease of compulsive. No, all they talked about was incest. And they didn't talk about how they worked any principles or traditions or anything. They just talked about their experience. Well, on one hand, it was sort of interesting, but on the other, it wasn't. It was tragic that all these women were not adhering to principles and traditions. So, the world changer, I went to their group conscience meeting, and when it was the appropriate time, I raised my hand and I expressed my concern that the meeting was not following traditions or the steps or actually sticking to our topic, and that is recovering from compulsive overeating. I still remember they looked at me like I had 3 heads. I mean, it was their meeting. There was really very little discussion. They called for a vote. It was 7-1. 7 people were not willing to change, and I was the single opposing vote. So I had to accept their decision, and I found a different meeting to go to. I never went back to that meeting. And within about 3 months, the meeting dissolved. And it just, and to me, that was always the best example of the need to use the steps and follow traditions if we want our meetings and the fellowship to continue. So again, certain things, kind of stick with you. Okay, step 3. The only requirement for OA membership is a desire to stop eating compulsively. The spiritual principle is identity. I love this tradition. Over the course of my life, I can't tell you how many different organizations, civic, political, church, personal, you name it. I belonged and participated in all kinds of organizations. And almost without exception, they've had certain requirements, certain rules that would make you a member of that group, but you had to follow these. Not to mention that many of them were quite expensive. Your entrance fee, your service fee, or your dues, or whatever. But in OA, all we need is the desire to stop eating compulsively. And as it says in the chapter in the book, we don't have to be successful at becoming abstinent. We just have to maintain the desire to stop eating compulsively. Excuse me. I'm not going to go into the differences of, we do have many special focus groups. It might be a men's group, a women's only group, a gay and lesbian group, all of those sorts of things. Our 12 and 12 explains that very well. The bottom issue here is that regardless if it's a special focus meeting or not, every member must be welcome. And years ago, I was traveling, and the only meeting I could get to was a men's meeting. I'll never forget it, because I walked in and they were very welcoming. I mean, it was fine. It was fine. And so that's really one of my only experiences as, going into a special focus meeting when I wasn't a member of the special focus. And I always laughingly say, as I said before, I've been maintaining a 90-pound weight loss. And I always thought, if I had just waited until I gained 10 pounds more and then found OA, I could be a member of the 100-pounders. But I didn't make it. So, and I'll probably never lose 10 more pounds now. So I'll just have to envy all the members who are in the 100-pounders club. And, you know, as I mentioned before, it's when people are unable to get abstinent, they still keep coming. And, you know, we have that saying, keep coming back. We say it to long-timers. We say it to newcomers. Keep coming back. And I have to admire so many members that I've seen over the years that in spite of not losing weight, maybe gaining weight in program, they keep coming back, you know, and I think that that's grace from their higher power, because that to me would be very discouraging. And again, I remember I was when I was in program in San Francisco, and I was there for 4 years, year in and year out, this young, and she was young, she was a young woman, kept coming. And she was, I mean, she'd gain weight, and she never, ever was able to achieve abstinence. And I went back a number of years after I graduated. And while I was there, I went to one of my old OA meetings to reminisce and see everybody. And here was a newcomer. I didn't recognize this person. She finally was able to attain abstinence, and she lost about 150 pounds. I mean, I didn't even recognize her. And it was one of the best examples I've ever seen of keep coming back. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop eating compulsively. Tradition 5. I am going to read from, that's page 120. Excuse me, my notes folded over. There we go. I think it's 120. Yes, page 120. In OA, I'm sorry, tradition 5, each group, no, wait, where are we? Yes, tradition, each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to the compulsive overeater who still suffers. And the spiritual principle is purpose. In OA, we found people who had done and felt the same things we had. We began to listen eagerly to what they had to say. We wanted to know how they were getting well. From these experiences, we discovered a key principle. The practicing compulsive overeater is more likely to find help from someone who has also experienced the pain of compulsive eating than from anyone else. Speaking openly about our own struggles from the perspective of our OA recovery, we bring the suffering newcomer the message of strength and hope that we have found in the OA fellowship. And again, if we were meeting face to face, I would ask you how you personally have carried the message. I think all of us carry the message within our meetings, our groups, just by either telling our story, by being a speaker, by being a sponsor, by calling a newcomer. There are so many ways to help carry the message. But what's always fun to hear is how have you carried the message outside of OA? And I have two stories. First, I have to say, I will tell anyone and everyone that I'm a member of Overeaters Anonymous. I feel no shame, just as I would feel no shame if I had diabetes. I am a compulsive overeater. I have this disease, and I have found my prescription, which is for me, Overeaters Anonymous. So I tell two stories about this because, as I said, anybody will listen. And I'm like a fisherman. I'll throw out a hook with a little bit of bait on it, and I'll see if somebody nibbles at it. I'll go a little further. If somebody really bites and I got them hooked, man, they're in. But after I had lost all my weight, and the first time after that I went to get a new driver's license, I got my picture. Oh, I actually put my real weight on my driver's license, which in itself was a miracle because, you know, if only I had been the weight that I kept putting on my driver's license, I probably wouldn't have needed OA. But anyway, so I was getting my picture taken, and I was sitting next to a young woman who was very, very overweight. So I'm sitting there and I'm excited. And so I said to her, "Oh, I can hardly wait to see my picture." "Oh, why?" "Well, I've lost 90 pounds recently, and I want the picture on my driver's license to reflect this." The hook's going out, okay? And she said, "Oh, really? How did you lose the weight?" And I told her about my experience in Overeaters Anonymous. Now, whether she ever went or not, I don't know, but the seed was planted. Another, like when I would go clothes shopping, and to go from, a size 18 or 20 or whatever down to a size 8 was pretty exciting. And so I would go but I could never, it took me a long time.
Donnie, it's
Pardon?
5 minutes.
Oh dear. Oh goodness, we're only at step 5. Okay. Anyway, I would say to the salesperson if they were obese, "This is so exciting to be buying clothes that are, 6 sizes smaller or something." And they'd say, "Well, how'd you do that?" Again, oh my, here I thought I would finish the 12 steps and have 20 minutes left. Let me see, where do I want? Oh, I think one thing, I think I'm going to go to step 7. Every OA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. And I'm not even thinking about the money that we might, throw in the pot. But what I think is so critically important about this particular tradition is it doesn't refer to just money. It refers to service. It refers to service. And so I think that aspect of tradition 7 is often omitted. We figure, well, we follow that tradition if we, put our money in. But I believe personally that service is the key to my longevity in program. I prefer to call myself a long timer rather than an old timer, even though both ideas are true. but anyway, and when I think about service as a sponsor, I often ask my sponsees 2 key questions. 1, what step are you working on today? Because we should always have a focus in mind about what step we might really concentrate on that day. But the other question I ask them is, what service are you doing? And I think that it is a sponsor's responsibility to direct their sponsees into service positions. And at Intergroup today, we had such an interesting discussion. We have a nominating committee, and the nominating chair was saying, which positions are coming up very, very shortly. And so she said, did we have any ideas how to get new blood? We've got all of our positions are always filled. We have lots of service people, but it's often pretty much the same core, and we just, dance into other positions. And so we tried to think of what things, we could do. And the first one we said was sponsors doing a one-to-one with their sponsees to try and get them, above the group level, to get them, an intergroup rep. That's always a great, great way. Another thing we're going to do for next month, each member of both our board and our intergroup reps, all the people, are going to try to bring one other person, which is easy to do on Zoom, bring another person, because intergroup sounds, it sounds boring. I don't find it boring at all. I think it's exciting to be right in the middle of the action, and to know what's going on. And I'm trying to think we came up with some really good ideas to try and get new blood. So I did want to be sure and make that point that on Tradition 7, it isn't just about money, although of course it is about money. I mean, we need money to operate. We also, in my intergroup, have an interesting situation going on. We've got more money than we know what to do with because we haven't sent reps to our region because there hasn't been a region. We didn't go to World Service last year, so all of that money has accumulated. So now we're in the process of finding great ways to spend this money and focusing on ways to carry the message. So those are some of, let me just see if I had any, this one I found to be so interesting Tradition 10, Overeaters Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, hence the OA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. And that's the spiritual principle, is neutrality. And that's the concept that we do not use the moral weight of Overeaters Anonymous behind other good causes. I mean, there are so many good causes out there. I mean, and I'm sure probably every member has at least one other thing that they're supporting. I'm an environmental activist. It's my passion. And I don't think one person in my home group, intergroup, any place locally has any idea that I'm an environmental activist because I don't talk about it there. That's not what we do. But this would come up very often when I was a trustee. These issues would come up to the Board of Trustees, should we endorse so-and-so because they want to improve the food at local schools? Well, food, that's an issue for overeaters. I mean, sure, why wouldn't we? Of course, those kids should eat good food and they shouldn't have access to candy machines and things like that. Nope. It just didn't work. We didn't do that.
It's
Okay.
5 minutes.
I'm so, give me a microphone. I'm a danger. Anyway, it was wonderful sharing with you. And if anybody has any ideas or questions that are specific to, their situation related to the traditions, I would love to hear from you. And I think our somebody put,
Yep.
or Sue, somebody put my contact information in the chat box. So it was a delight visiting with you, and have a great day.
Dodie, thank you so much for your all your perspective, and your insights were so fantastic. Thank you very much. We will now open the floor for 2-minute question and answers and shares for the speaker. Please focus your questions and shares on the topic of this meeting. For those who have arrived late, the topic of this session is on the traditions. Please place your questions in chat and the Zoom host will read them to the speaker. Please focus your shares on answering the question. What is your main takeaway? How will you apply this to your program? To share, please raise your virtual hand by selecting Raise Hand at the bottom of the reaction menu located at the bottom of your screen or at the bottom of the participant list. If you are joining by phone only, please use *9 to raise and lower your hand. The leader will call on you to share. Please select Unmute to speak. The timer will signal when time's up. The meeting is now open for Q&A and sharing. And I see Adrian has her hand up already, so that's fantastic. Go ahead, Adrian.
Thank you, Dodie. I love the traditions. I live by the traditions. And I have had quite an opportunity as chairing the convention this year to apply the traditions, especially to focus on tradition 1, unity, and 2, to realize that I am not God, that I was a trusted servant listening. God was paving the way to listen and to just be open to other people's suggestions and guidance, and applying the concepts too, to let them do what they were going to do and give them the dignity to show up and do their jobs. So I just stretched and really grew with the traditions. Now, something I have been taught is to put my name in the traditions. And one of them that really applies to me is that Adrian has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, Adrian's name ought never be drawn into public controversy. So that has really kept me out of a lot of sticky wickets.
Yes.
So that is what I have been taught to help me, because the traditions are for relationships, in keeping my relationships straight and pure. So thanks so much for bringing your experience, strength, and hope. Got a lot out of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Adrian. Anybody else have a question or a share they'd like to express? Well, I do, if that's okay, Dodie.
Sure.
All right. I just wanted to tell you that I love the way you opened this time with describing what a tradition is and how for us to look at them, because I never did that before. I never, the shoe analogy and the father sitting at the head of the table, those are all terrific ways for me to say, oh, traditions. Yeah, now I really get what that means. And so thank you for that. Appreciated that. Opened my mind.
This is Sue. I have a question in the chat. And it's from Seneca. Were there any traditions you didn't cover that are important for us to know more about?
Seneca, I think every tradition is important. And I would stress so much, if you're not familiar with the traditions, to go back to our book, The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions of Overeaters Anonymous. I mean, I just think it's brilliantly written. And I think we're very fortunate to have this book. So that would be my suggestion. You know, the ones that I didn't cover, they were in order. I didn't, I tried not to give any one any more importance than the other, because to me, they're the 12 traditions. They're the glue that holds our meetings and our lives together if we follow them. And so I would strongly urge you to just, sit down. And it has some great examples, but the questions are wonderful. And I really hope that, some of you will take that suggestion and go back and read these. Okay, this is for the 11th tradition. One of the questions, how does our group make its meeting place and time known to compulsive eaters who might want to attend? And I have said 100 times, we are not a secret society. We are an anonymous organization, but not a secret society. So we have to get our information out. How are people going to come to OA if we don't, put little notices in local newspapers or whatever would be appropriate for your situation? But I honestly could not name one more. But as we know, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our principles. So.
Thank you. Our timekeeper has a question.
Okay. Right. Well, Cindy doesn't seem to want to stop. Sorry about that. Don't want to do any of that. Well, perhaps somebody else wants to talk before while I try to figure out what I'm doing
So
here.
Dorothy, you're the last question. Go ahead and ask and I will time you.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a comment. I really enjoyed that, and I love the idea of explaining what a tradition is. And I know I found very important when I'd been in program for a while that it's really helpful if when to attend some meetings that actually study the traditions. I found that one of my home meetings when I was in Brooklyn, New York, that they spent one day out of the week. You know, we met on Saturdays. When we had one Saturday a month was on the tradition of the month, and I found that just really, really helpful. And I was thrilled when I moved back to Dallas to find a group that also does the same thing. Each on the second Saturday of the month, they read the tradition of that month, and people share about that. And then it's then followed by a group conscious meeting, you know. Now, to be honest, we get less people on those days often than others, but I still think it's a really important part of our having a strong meeting that's been going for years.
Mhm.
I
Thanks.
see.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
Thanks, Dorothy.
Okay. I think that's all we have time for, unless I think if somebody had like a 1-minute share. Nope. Should we go? All right. Well, thank you again so much, Jody. We really appreciate your service today and sharing with us.